Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 390. I'm the host Kyle Anzalone. Today joined by Dave DeCamp. Dave, how you doing today?
I'm good, Kyle. Thanks for having me back.
Excited to have you back on. You're definitely one of the audience favorite guests because you just have so many great insights every time I have you on. For anybody who's maybe new to the show and doesn't know Dave, he's the news editor at antiwar.com. So, between probably 5 and 10 news stories, Sunday through Thursday, Dave will write for the site. They get republished all over the internet. They're used by almost the entirety of the independent media when they write up articles on foreign policy. Everybody, even if they're leftist, libertarians, more conservative voices, all really rely on Dave's word. So Dave, you're really important to the anti-war movement and of course essential to antiwar.com. So great to have you back on today. And everybody, don't miss his show Anti-War News. He puts it out. There's like a new episode Monday through Friday morning. That's your schedule pretty much at this point.
Yeah. So what I do is, I put it out at midnight the night before because do all my writing and stuff at night. So, we work on Sunday night for the page on Monday. So the episode that I put out Sunday at midnight is the Monday morning show. Because I made it, the idea, my thinking of it was people would listen to it, on their commute to work in the morning, which sounds like that's how a lot of people do, digest it, which is cool. So that's the idea.
Yeah, I usually try to. I don't have a commute to work in the morning anymore, but usually when I'm out walking the dogs early, I'm listening to anti-war news, trying to prep for
Nice.
my show later in the day. All right, Dave. So I've had you on the show, I don't know, probably once a month or once every other month over the past year and a half. And I think every time I've asked you, how far is this, war between the US and Russia going to escalate? And, it's a really hard question to answer. So I'm not going to ask you that today. I want to focus on where do you think we are now in the escalation cycle? And specifically, I guess, we have a lot like the Abrams tanks. The U.S. pledged them, but they're not getting there till 2024, and so there's a lot going on right now. So, kind of, what is the Biden administration like? Where are they currently at in ratcheting up this war?
Yeah, so there's a lot of signs that they're actually thinking about winding this thing down a bit, but what they're hoping for over the next few months, they keep saying they want Ukraine to, launch a counteroffensive and make territorial gains. So I think, there could be a big escalation in the next few months, especially as, Russia, if you look at the battle lines now, they still haven't changed very much. Russia is making gains around that city, Bakhmut, in Donetsk in the east there, where they've been fighting for like 8 months now. But Russia's finally starting to enclose the city, and we keep hearing about this big Russian offensive that's coming, and Russia has definitely, kind of reinforced its positions. So who knows really if they're going to launch, this major offensive to try to, for a land grab. At least I would think they would want to take the territory and the rest that Ukraine still controls in the Donbass. But I think what they have done is going to make it harder for Ukraine to, retake this territory that the U.S. is hoping for. Because I've seen report after report of U.S. officials, the CIA director, when he went to Kiev in January, he told Zelensky, basically it's a pivotal moment in the war, and that all this aid that we're getting, the latest $45 billion aid package that they passed in December, he's saying once that's spent, it might be hard to get more. And it was interesting as I saw Ukrainian officials saying that they're worried that the Biden administration is actually going to use Congress as an excuse to wind down the aid, because that is what their message has been. But realistically, I mean, virtually every Democrat would vote for another one of these major aid packages, and I think most Republicans. So I think realistically, they could get one of those big aid packages unless there's a real lobby effort, from some of the more conservative groups against it. I think they could get it. So maybe they are actually trying to use that as an excuse to wind things down, because the U.S. has sent so many weapons and so much ammunition. You had, they're running out of artillery. That story that you wrote yesterday about how the life expectancy, according to an American, former Marine that's fighting in Ukraine, the life expectancy for Ukrainian soldiers is only 4 hours on the front. and he was talking about how much artillery is being used. So, they might be wondering if the policy is sustainable. At one of the recent meetings in Germany, what they call that, or maybe I think it was held in Brussels, it was the Ukraine Defense Contact Group and some NATO meetings. It was kind of expected that they were going to announce all this new military aid for Ukraine, but it was mainly the public discussion was mostly focused on ammunition, how they're going to ramp up production. So I think they are actually thinking about an end game here. But again, these next few months, there could be some huge escalations. But I don't think we're going to see the U.S. say, yeah, we're going to send F-16s. I think those escalations of military aid, of new weapons, are done for now. I don't think we're going to see that right now. But again, who knows? Because while they are thinking about winding it down, there's also people like Blinken and Newland who I think really want to keep this thing going. So, yeah, it's tough to say what's going to happen. But I think these next few months, we should expect a lot of heavy fighting to continue.
Yeah. So on the Congress issue, Dave, I was wondering if maybe because there's clearly not enough votes to even anywhere near stop the another aid package getting through even the House. Like the Senate is clearly on board with this. Maybe Rand Paul will vote against it, maybe Mike Lee, but but that's it. In the House you have what, maybe between 11 and 20 Republicans now who would vote against it. I do wonder if maybe the White House is concerned that we're getting close to there being enough political pressure and enough support within Congress, particularly the Republicans, to have some oversight stuck into the bill. And so we end up with a special investigator general like we had for Afghanistan for Ukraine. Maybe they really don't want that and would rather actually just not pass another massive aid package rather than having, to concede to putting some oversight in the bill. So I wonder if it's a little bit more nuanced than that, because it really doesn't make sense. Like there's not even enough Republicans to oppose this for the White House to blame them for not being able to pass the bill. So, I'm kind of confused on where, both the White House and Kiev are apparently feeling worried about Congress. And then also, I guess I want to ask you, because I feel like when it comes to the war, there are the hots within the Biden administration, but also seems like there's a lot of hots in London. And that's a big factor here. And when I look at the potential transfer of F-16s to Ukraine, I do think about, the British now training Ukrainian pilots on Western fighter jets and, what that could mean in the future. And I guess with the Abrams tanks, right, we had this situation where basically the West kind of seemingly overpromised. They're not coming until 2024, and so that would, from my guess, would give Russia a lot of time to prepare for how to fight the Abrams tanks. Get the right equipment in place to be able to take those tanks out. And so that seems kind of just strategically stupid to me. So maybe they're going to wait until the Ukrainians are ready to actually fight with the fighter jets to announce their transfer or something like that. I don't know. I've been very, I guess, kind of hawkish on the idea that the U.S. would end up sending the fighter jets, or at least approve a third country to do so.
Yeah, no, I think that's possible. I would just be surprised if we see it, soon. I think they're kind of going to sit back and see what happens over these next couple months. Again, I could be wrong. And then with the British, so there's actually a report in the Wall Street Journal recently that said the British, Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, has put forward this plan for a post-war Ukraine, and they're going to discuss it at a NATO meeting in July this summer. And under this plan, it would pretty much guarantee that Ukraine would continue to receive military aid from the NATO countries after the war, and get more advanced equipment, including probably fighter jets. And it sounds like the UK is, they're saying that this is part of long-term support. And it says that Sunak supports using this deal to incentivize Zelensky to negotiate. And this is the first time I've seen any indication that the British government was thinking about negotiations or thinking about ending the war. So I thought that was interesting. But at the same time, I don't think anything like that is going to be acceptable to Russia. I think at this point, Russia has given up on negotiations, and they have plans to to keep going with this war. I don't like, and I've seen other indications that this is kind of what NATO wants. After they want some kind of settlement after a while, but they still want to make Ukraine, a de facto NATO country. And with Sunak's plan, they wouldn't become a full member with the Article 5 security guarantees. It would be focused, but they would be guaranteed all this great military equipment. The British defense contractors and other European defense contractors want to start, setting up factories in Ukraine and just making, a NATO outpost on Russia's border, which is what Ukraine already is. But they just want to kind of solidify that even more. So again, it's interesting to see the UK thinking about that, but at the same time, I don't think that would be acceptable to Russia.
Right. So, that seems to me to be like the problem with all the Western proposed, uh, any kind of settlement to the war is that none of it is even anywhere near what Russia demands. Now, I guess one interesting thing that unfolded over the past week, Dave, is we had talk of the Chinese rolling out a peace plan, and then the Chinese foreign minister met with the Ukrainian foreign minister and also the Russian president, and China put forward this 12-point peace plan, and it seems to me that Russia kind of dismissed this. So, what's your thoughts on all this?
Sounded like Russia didn't think too much of it, although I thought they said that they wanted to discuss it further with China. What I thought was more interesting about that was that Zelensky kind of sounded open to it, and he said that he wanted to meet with China's president, with Xi Jinping, and then he had President Biden just completely dismiss it and say, it's totally. I think he said it wasn't rational, the idea of China being involved in the negotiations at all. And if you look at their peace plan, it's not like terms that so much Russia and Ukraine would have to agree to. It's more kind of broad things focusing on ending, calling a ceasefire, ending the hostilities, and resuming peace talks. And then in those talks, Russia and Ukraine would work things out, the territorial lines and things like that. But I think maybe Russia's dismissal is, again, the what I'm seeing from the Russian side now, for a while, for months and months, they were calling for negotiations, but it's been a while since they've said that. I think they have made up their mind that they're not going to negotiate with this Zelensky government or anybody in the West, and that they're going to continue to push ahead with their goals. And then that's the question, is what are their real goals now? If they take the rest of the Donbass, would they want to negotiate after that, or would they want to keep going? I think these are questions that, we don't know the answer to right now. So, while the Biden administration is thinking about winding this thing down, I think Russia has other plans.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I feel like just over a year ago, before the Russian invasion, one of the things that made me concerned that the invasion was going to happen, not that I don't want to say I predicted it, because I waffle back and forth quite a bit, but one of the reasons I was very concerned it would happen was, you look at what investment, Russia puts into diplomacy, right? But then once they start building up their military along Ukraine's border, well, that's a massive investment too. Positioning all those troops, all that equipment and everything like that. And so to withdraw that and to back down, there's some not only economic costs to the waste of doing that. And so when, Russia went and had immobilized all these troops, I think for Russia, maybe the time for diplomacy has passed. Now, Putin feels like, whether he does or not, holds essentially the better hand, right? And, his forces are ready to go. And so at this point, from our perspective, obviously, continuing this war for any more Ukrainian territory is a waste of life. But, from the perspective of people in the White House and the Kremlin and the world leaders and military planners, I think, their perspective was it's stupid to negotiate now, because you're going to make a bunch of battlefield gains in the coming months, and you prepared and invested all this money, trained all these troops, drafted all these young men to do that. I worry that we're in that position, and especially as I want to get your thoughts on this, the recent comments by Dmitry Medvedev. suggesting that Russia would use nuclear weapons. I felt like this was going on several months ago, and in part it was maybe some input from China that got Russia to back off talking about using nuclear weapons, but now it seems to be coming up again.
Yeah, and that's something that Putin also kind of alluded to when he made his big speech recently to Russia's Federal Assembly when he announced that they were pausing New START, which is the last nuclear arms control treaty between the U.S. and Russia. Talking about the war, he was saying, basically, the West and NATO and the U.S. they want to defeat Russia. And he said this is an existential threat to us. And if you look at Russia's nuclear military doctrine, it allows the use of nuclear weapons if the existence of the Russian state is threatened. And that's kind of what Medvedev reaffirmed when he said after Putin's speech that we're willing to defend ourselves with every weapon we have, including nuclear weapons. And we have seen this rhetoric kind of pop up a bit more again recently. They're just making clear again how seriously they take all this. When we've seen all this talk about the U.S. supporting Ukrainian attacks on Crimea and Zelensky saying that they're preparing to attack Crimea. And he said the way they're doing this is by forming new battalions and sending troops to other countries to train. So it shows how, NATO is helping Ukraine prepare an attack on Crimea. But at the same time, Russia controls a lot of territory north of Crimea. Crimea is not really under threat of any kind of Ukrainian invasion right now. But still, that is the rhetoric. And what's interesting is that, the U.S. media, the Biden administration, they were making a big deal about Russia's nuclear rhetoric a few months ago, but they kind of have been downplaying it recently, which is strange. When Biden was asked about the New START treaty being suspended, he said, "Oh yeah, it's a mistake, but I don't think it's any indication that they're going to use nuclear weapons or anything. I don't think it's really anything to worry about," was basically Biden's message, which is strange. I don't really know what to make of that. So again, I think it's kind of Russia just reminding them, and what they're saying now about after New START being suspended is that Russian officials, a lot of them have said if the U.S. takes steps to de-escalate, that's really the only way to restore this treaty. And I don't think there's any sign that they're going to do that right now.
Yeah. I tried to make this point on the last show and then I kind of forgot what I was saying. So I'll do it now. I think Russia maybe sees the problem with the Iran nuclear deal, which was the U.S. tried to compartmentalize the relationship with Iran, sign a deal just focused on the nuclear accords. And then, of course, the deal's attacked from halts on all sides of America and to the point where, dissolves in a couple of years. And so I think Russia maybe sees that the whole relationship with the United States needs to be repaired, or at least, maybe to a more neutral state before you can move forward on any particular issue. Because if Biden tries to move forward with Russia on nuclear negotiations while the war in Ukraine is still going on, then Republicans and probably most Democrats are going to flip out every time an American's in the room with a Russian. I mean, from my understanding, Dave, there's still a lot of these international conferences that go on, like the United Nations and things like this, where if a Russian official speaks, all the Western officials get up and leave the room.
Yeah, they've been doing that at the UN. It's so ridiculous. I know Yellen did that at one of the G20 summits. When the Russian officials started talking, she left. But yeah, I mean, that does seem to be how Russia's viewing it now, that, just this one treaty isn't going to do much good, I guess, because of the state of relations, and they need to address a lot of other issues with the nuclear stockpile. And in the beginning, early in the war, in the first few months, Russia was saying, so the U.S. and Russia were engaged in arms control talks before the invasion. The U.S. cut them off after the invasion, and then for months and months, Russia was saying, let's talk arms control, and the U.S. was saying no. They said it wasn't the time to do it. And then eventually the U.S. said, all right, let's at least start talking on New START, because the inspections under New START have been suspended since March 2020 due to COVID. I think the U.S. requested to inspect Russia's arsenal. I think it was in August, this past August, and Russia said no. They said their inspectors couldn't go to the U.S. because of sanctions. And then they said, yeah, let's talk about the New START, and they made a schedule to they scheduled talks they're going to be held in Egypt in November, and Russia canceled them the last minute, citing tensions in Ukraine, basically making the decision that, no, you know what, we can't have these talks while you're funding this proxy war on our border here. And unfortunately, now there's no active arms control agreements between the U.S. and Russia, which is really concerning, I would say.
Yeah, I guess the little bit of good news I could hold on to is that Russia says they're not going to change their nuclear arsenal. And so hopefully, if something were to shift quickly here, Dave, which doesn't seem likely, but let's say the White House is serious about unwinding this war in the summer, then maybe it could be a quick return to the New START Accord in the fall or early next year or something. But again, the war in Ukraine, I think probably has to end first. So, one last question on the Russia situation, the Ukraine war. I could ask you more about weapons and the $10 billion in economic aid that Janet Yellen pledged, but
Mhm.
I got to ask about the Nord Stream pipeline, Dave. What do you think about Seymour Hersh's story and the possibility that the U.S. was behind it? I mean, I think we've talked about in this past. I was pretty skeptical that the U.S. was behind this, but I now regret thinking better of Joe Biden than I should have, and that the U.S. was willing to do this. Apparently,
Well, I always figured, that the U.S. was involved in some way. I thought if they did do something like this, they would kind of have it done by proxy so they could separate themselves from it. I figured maybe it was the British or the Polish or one of those countries, but then this is not what I expected at all. What Seymour Hersh's report said that President Biden ordered it. So it's a pretty shocking report. I am inclined to believe Hersh and believe the report until there's evidence to the that goes against his report. I'm on the side of believing it and hoping that because it's such a huge allegation. And I mean, the biggest thing is that they were planning it before the invasion. And I think if this is exposed, exposing this, and if it gets confirmed in any way by any kind of mainstream media, I think that could really change things. I think that might be a chance to end this, madness, because it will show that, the U.S. is the aggressor, is an aggressor in this war. And I think a lot of people in Congress will say, okay, that was too far. It's an act of war against Russia. It's an attack on Germany's infrastructure. So I really hope, and I still am holding out hope, this might be naive, that there's somebody, whether it's the New York Times, at the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, that has sources in the national security apparatus that is like, all right, I should probably try to look into this and see if I can confirm it. And one of the reasons why I'm hopeful that that might happen eventually is because I think it was back in January or around then, both the Washington Post and the New York Times had these big reports about how there was no evidence that Russia was behind it. Um, because all the media insinuated that Russia was behind it when it first happened, but then Washington Post and the New York Times admitted it probably wasn't, and they said things about how, actually no, this was the Times of London, which actually did report pretty well on Hersh's report, but they said that Germany has not ruled out that it was a Western country. So either hopefully we see some confirmation either from the U.S. or from somewhere in Europe. Maybe some German media is looking into it now. Hopefully people are angry enough about it in Germany. And that's another thing, is that there's been a lot of protests in Germany. So hopefully there's enough pressure. And I know there's some members of Germany's parliament that are demanding an investigation into this. So hopefully that leads to confirmation of Hersh's report, because unfortunately it doesn't seem like they're gonna take him at his word for it. Anybody in the West, in the governments, I mean, especially in the U.S., the Biden administration just dismissing it, like kind of laughing it off in press conferences. So yeah, again, hopefully, it's confirmed somewhere in some way.
yeah. All right, Dave. Let's I think do a gap here to get to the China and Taiwan issue. So the Washington claims that we have to help Ukraine, help Taiwan in order to, promote freedom and democracy and all of this. We have a great article on antiwar.com today, or we link to it on the front page. It's in the viewpoint section by Branko March Teach. He writes a Jacobin, and it goes over how Ukraine has blacklisted journalists and has criminalized dissent in the country, under Zelensky's rule as president, and how, we look at the U.S. has flooded the country with arms, flooded Zelensky with arms, and it's turned more into a military dictatorship than a democracy. Now you have this story up at antiwar.com today. Taiwan criminalizes spreading rumors during wartime. And boy, Dave, it seems like the more weapons that the U.S. gives a country, the more it cracks down on its journalists.
Yeah, so this is something, it hasn't been passed yet by Taiwan, but the defense ministry proposed a change to their law on mobilization, on things that they do if they have to mobilize for war. And they're proposing that people that spread rumors, or what they call, misinformation, could be punished with up to 3 years in jail. So it seems like pretty serious punishment. And also it would put government control on all the media, whether it's print, online, or video. So yeah, they're getting ready basically for, martial law and consolidating power if the war does break out eventually with China. And there is some opposition to it, it looks like, from the Kuomintang in the parliament. At least I saw a quote from one of their lawmakers saying that, they were concerned about it, that it could be abused, and could they use this during peacetime. But yeah, I mean, we're gonna, if a war does break out between China and Taiwan, this is what kind of always happens in wartime, and that is that they crack down on dissent, and it looks like Taiwan's preparing for that.
Yeah. All right, Dave. Next up, just the general Cold War with between the U.S. and China. The latest round of escalation. China protests after U.S. spy plane flies through Taiwan Strait. What's going on here?
Yeah, so this is kind of typical tensions between the U.S. and China, although they actually don't send spy planes into the Taiwan Strait that often. U.S. warships go through there about once every month, and a spy plane went through there this week, and China protested it. And it was the first time, according to the South China Morning Post and people that really track this stuff, it was the first time a U.S. spy plane, a U.S. surveillance plane, made that flight since June 2022. So it is something that doesn't happen that often, even though the U.S. Navy tried to act like it's kind of a routine flight. And China said it wasn't happy. And this comes as China has, really stepped up its flights in the Taiwan Strait since Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan in August. Since then, they've kept up the pressure. They frequently fly planes across what they call the median line, that is an informal barrier that separates the two sides of the strait. They used to never really cross it. Now they do it a lot, almost every day. So there's a lot of planes flying around, not so much in the Taiwan Strait when it comes to American planes, but in the South China Sea. There's a ton of U.S. planes. There's a lot of Chinese planes. They have close encounters pretty often, and it's just a dangerous area where something could pop off between the U.S. and China. There was just, I think it was CNN, they sent a reporter up with an American spy plane, surveillance plane in the South China Sea. And they were like, "Look, there's a Chinese plane flying about 500 feet away from us." Acting surprised that they saw a Chinese plane in the South China Sea. But I mean, the fact that they're 500 feet away from each other, I think it shows that they're encountering each other quite a bit, the U.S. and Chinese militaries. And now the U.S. is talking about their Coast Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard in the South China Sea, doing joint patrols with the Philippines, and they have encounters with Chinese vessels. And the U.S. always says, if you attack a Philippine vessel, it's going to invoke, our mutual defense treaty, which is just insane, guaranteeing that the U.S. would go to war, over this maritime dispute in the South China Sea. And we're just seeing a lot of ways that they're increasing their military activity over there.
Yeah, but I guess the concern is, right, Dave, that the fear mongering against China is so strong right now in the U.S. We have this. What? Let me quickly ask you about this. We had this report out about the Department of Energy, I believe, giving a low confidence assessment that the coronavirus was a lab leak. And it seems to me that this is mostly being used to condemn China. And so I guess I've never been convinced by an intelligence assessment, particularly not one that they judge itself by low confidence. Go back to like the Russiagate stuff, all of that was medium confidence. And of course, that was all garbage too. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I mean, I've always been open to the lab leak theory, and it seems like it's definitely pretty plausible. But yeah, it is strange that the Wall Street Journal had this article, and low confidence really doesn't really mean anything. It means it's based on a rumor or somebody. It could mean that somebody just kind of thought that, and they put that out there. So the fact that they leaked that to the media, yeah, they're probably going to use it against China. And I think it's part of an effort because, again, I think that the lab leak theory is likely, but the U.S. was funding that lab, funding the gain of function research there. And I think they're probably going to try to deflect their role in that and kind of put it on China. So I think we're going to see a big push to do that. And the U.S. could use that really to ramp things up, this new Cold War with China. But at the same time, I think they are kind of being careful, again, because of that U.S. role. That's why we haven't really seen the Biden administration come out and say it's all China's fault, COVID, because China could probably turn around and say, well, you were pretty involved in this too. So, yeah, it's kind of a weird thing. And it's tough to say, it's not something I've followed too closely, the whole lab leak thing. But again, I'm always suspicious when it comes to a low confidence thing. And it does seem like it was purposely put out there. But I think people should just, think about it a little more before just jumping and say, oh, see, we've been right all along about this, when it, might be being used for a nefarious purpose. I know on Tucker, he had this Chinese virologist who's claiming now that China released it intentionally, which she's been on there before saying that. And, he had her jump on after this report came out. And her claim is based on nothing. She basically says, oh, the lab is so high security, it couldn't have leaked. But then, that's basically her claim. So that to me seems all like nonsense. So yeah, the China hawks are definitely going to use this. And I think people should, and I think it's good, like Rand Paul and people that really are holding Fauci's feet to the fire. I think all the public disdain for Fauci is going to help us not put this all on China. Don't forget the U.S. role in it.
Yeah. I guess my first question is like, is it, a naturally occurring thing, or did, humans have a hand in it? And I think that's all. Once you establish that the humans had a hand in it, I think that opens up a whole slate of questions. I feel like there's this really weird consensus that, if it came from a lab, then, it was this accidental lab leak from Wuhan, which, or, the conservative idea, which is an intentional lab leak. It never made sense to me why China would, if they were going to intentionally release this virus, wouldn't you do it in another country? I don't know that it does. You know what I mean? It seems that you release in your own country. Then it becomes the China virus, which is, I think, probably a PR problem that they have to deal with. But also, you inflict your own population with it first, especially with the country that locked down so hard. If they would have released it somewhere else, and they might not have, even had an initial outbreak quite so large. So, anyways, Dave, anything else we have the militarization of Japan. We'll end with this one. So, Japan Prime Minister says Tokyo will buy 400 U.S. made Tomahawk missiles. What do you think about this?
Yeah, so this is part of Japan's plan. They're doubling their military budget over the next few years, specifically to, this is all focused on China. They just released a national security strategy that named China, their top threat, similar to U.S. strategy documents that have been coming out. So it's a buildup explicitly aimed at China, and these Tomahawk missiles, they have a range of over 1,000 miles, and it's going to give Japan a strike ability that they haven't really had since after World War II, since the U.S. occupation forces imposed this constitution on Japan that said they were supposed to be a pacifist nation. Their military is only supposed to be for self-defense, but now the U.S. is encouraging them to change that. and they've taken a lot of steps away from that, but this is just one of the biggest ones by buying these Tomahawk missiles. So they're going to buy 400, and that'll put a lot of targets in China in range as well as North Korea. And you see U.S. military officials specifically say that this increase in U.S. and Japanese cooperation is being done to prepare for war with China. And the U.S. is also expanding bases in the Philippines. So again, it's just part of this thing. We're really seeing it kind of culminate because it's something I've been following pretty closely over the past few years. And there's been all these strategy documents saying we got to build up in the Asia Pacific because of China. And we're seeing a lot of steps in that direction now, concrete steps like the Philippines, a new base in Guam. They're expecting to expand their military presence, I believe, in Micronesia, in Oceania, where the U.S. has these deals with the Marshall Islands, and Micronesia and Palau, which are basically U.S. territories in a way. They have these agreements that the U.S. military can be there, and they can deny access to other militaries to these territories. In exchange, they give them aid. And I believe, the U.S. is renewing these agreements, so it's not anything new, but I believe they also want to expand their presence there.
Yeah, they want to control the Pacific Ocean, Dave. That doesn't seem
Yeah.
like an overexpanded empire whatsoever. Anyways, that's probably a great place for us to wrap up. If you got anything else, Dave, go ahead and say it. If not, just tell people, best way to follow you and to make sure that they catch everything you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, antiwar.com is where you'll see all my writing. You can follow me on Twitter at DeCamp Dave and listen to the podcast Anti-War News with Dave DeCamp. It's wherever you listen to podcasts, or there's also a video on YouTube and Odysee. So go check all that out.
All right. Yeah, Anti-War News has a little spot on the front page of antiwar.com. You find this show in the blog section of antiwar.com. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, and we often reprint Dave at the Institute as well. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Kyle.